have a keynote from Ashok Gupta, who's the leading voice in reframing how we think about capital, value, and long-term risk. Ashok leads the New Capital Consensus, which is challenging long-term standing assumptions around risk appetite and value creation. Please join me in welcoming Ashok.
Good morning. Let me start with a quote. Now, you may be asking, what has this quote about the Spanish power system got to do with UK financial risk? Well, when you layer renewable energy systems onto a system designed for a different type of energy, failures can result. And we've been doing exactly the same with our financial systems. We've taken systems designed for one type of risk and layered onto them all sorts of other risks and regulation, creating amorphous systems that don't anymore have a coherent design. Our financial systems were created in an age of predominantly independent risks. But we now live in a world of interconnected, interdependent risks, and our risk systems are inadequate for the world we currently live in. Our assumptions about normal distributions with thin tails just do not work in an interconnected system world. We need to understand risk transmission channels and tipping points using economic practices like ergodic economics, complexity economics, and systems thinking. And we need to factor in uncertainty, which sadly we don't have time to talk about today, but that's a whole other topic. We must understand our systems holistically. Too many emerging risks come from unexpected parts of the system. So I'm here today talking as director of the New Capital Consensus Project. That's a coalition of independent, apolitical think tanks brought together and incubated by Chatham House to study the UK investment system and develop policy solutions, particularly to this problem. How is it the UK can have the second largest pool of investment capital in the OECD and yet be one of the worst invested countries? And the answer is that the investment transmission system that takes money from savers and injects it into the real economy is ineffective. This system is vitally important to the UK as it provides the bulk of the investment for all of our other systems, transport, energy, health, etc. And the way we finance these systems affects the environment and planet. The investment system really is the engine behind the economy. So if we really care about economic growth, levelling up, intergenerational inequality, and a just transition, we have to fix the investment system. And the focus on banking has meant that the investment system has gone under the radar screen. And its importance to economic growth has really not been recognised. So let's just take a few minutes to describe it. At the top, you have UK savers, who provide the bulk of the money, particularly for retirement. And at the bottom, you have the UK economy. Money moves through the system by pooling savers' investments, either in defined benefit, defined contribution, or retail investments. And at the bottom, companies access capital by issuing securities, debt or equity, and that's public, private, or government. In the middle, you have asset managers who match these investment pools to the securities. Companies make returns on their investments, which in turn go back to savers. Good returns for savers means a healthy economy for all of us. And of course, we don't operate in isolation. We attract foreign capital into our system, that's great, but there are very high levels of leakage out of the system. Now, we've spent 18 months studying the UK investment system and its incentives and drivers. And that's in a report we launched earlier this year based upon 50 interviews with people right across the system. We identified three major problems. Problem one, the asset owner universe is heavily fragmented, particularly pensions. Two, the system operates in a very short-term way because of its focus on volatility and liquidity, daily liquidity. And thirdly, it directs far too much money into the wrong places. Far too much goes to gilts and LDI, far too much goes overseas, and far too much goes to secondary investment. Very little actually goes into the primary investment that grows the economy, creates jobs and wealth, the sort of investment the country needs. And rather bizarrely, there are almost no incentives within the system to generate returns. We looked hard, we just couldn't find any. What does that tell us about risk-taking within the system? So the solutions, we identified 5. 1, we need to change the industry risk culture to bear risk better, be more long-term. 2, we need to reduce the industry obsession with daily liquidity. Savers don't need it, it costs them in returns. 3, we need to incentivize, through tax, investing in the UK. If you benchmark against global indices, you're putting more money into Amazon than the whole of the UK. Fourthly, we need to consolidate the pension sector. And finally, our regulatory system is now fragmented and not designed to ensure system effectiveness. We need a regulatory system that addresses the problems of the next 2 decades, not the last 2. Turning to fragmentation in the pension sector, in theory, we have 5,500 independent DB pension schemes. In reality, they operate more like one giant scheme. We've just released our second report, an analysis carried out by Leeds University that quantifies the amount of money in the occupational pension system, where it resides and how it's been invested. DB funds have piled into LDI investments driven by regulation and accounting that incentivized de-risking of pension schemes. And that was misguided because it created massive systemic risk. Our academics have quantified that the LDI crisis resulted in private DB schemes losing 1/3 of their assets. That's some £650 billion. Now, that may not matter for individual pension schemes targeting buyout, as the value of liabilities may have come down by an equal amount, and so members' benefits are not affected, but it does matter at a system level. We have lost 10% of the productive investment capital of the UK. A blog we've just released identifies 2 major problems within this system. 1, we've created a fragile system, as evidenced by the LDI crisis, but more importantly, the wholesale herding of DB schemes towards insurance buyouts is leading to de-risking of our investment strategies 20 years too early. That's a massive loss of investment potential. We need to address this by consolidating private DB schemes into properly regulated super funds that have the freedom to invest that neither existing insurers nor existing DB schemes have. That was recommended by the PLSA DB Task Force in 2018, which I chaired, and taken forward by DWP, but the initiative has stalled and needs reinvigorating. And it's only going to work if we allow insurance companies to set up super funds outside those Solvency UK ring fences. And we have a precedent for that in the banking world. I mentioned risk culture. A large part of this is risk measurement. Regulation and accounting based on market-based practices treat long-term risk in the same way as short-term risk, using volatility as a primary measurement. Volatility is not a risk to long-term investment. It's not a primary risk to long-term investing institutions. Market-based practices do not deal well with duration, path dependency, liquidity, and liquidity preferences. We need practices that do and reflect the way people actually behave. Bad risk measurement matters. And measuring risk by everybody in the same way incentivizes pension funds and insurers to sell at the same time as banks, when they should be doing the opposite, buying assets when banks have to sell them. And everybody buying assets at the same time and selling assets at the same time creates massive pro-cyclicality. If you're concerned, like me, that US policies are inflationary and could result in a significant market dislocation, and want to prevent the same sort of problems we saw in 2008, 2009, we need to take action now. It's no point taking action after the damage has been done. And regulatory forbearance is only of use if you can anticipate it. So let me end with a challenge to the risk experts in the audience. The job of a CRO is not to eliminate risk, but to permit institutions to undertake rewarded risk safely. Is that what we're doing? And if not, the risk community needs to speak up. Thank you.